Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're tearing into a topic that honestly might sound a little dry at first glance, but it is actually the invisible lifeblood of global aviation safety. When you see a massive jetliner taking off or even just a small Cessna cruising overhead, you're witnessing an incredible feat of engineering. But here is the fascinating reality. In aviation, turning a wrench and making a physical repair is really only half the job. The other half, the half that legally and practically allows that aircraft to leave the ground, is the paperwork. So today, we're going to explore the comprehensive anatomy of an aircraft's logbook, and we'll figure out exactly why these maintenance records are so strictly governed.
Think of it like this. An aircraft's logbook is basically a patient's medical chart. Imagine if a surgeon performs a flawless operation, but never writes down what they did, what medications were given, or when the patient is actually cleared to go home. The hospital just can't safely manage that patient's recovery, right? Well, aviation works the exact same way. Every single turn of a wrench, every inspection, and every replaced part needs a detailed prescription and essentially a doctor's signature. Without that record, the repair literally never happened in the eyes of the law. An undocumented aircraft is a grounded aircraft.
All right, let's dive right in. Here's a quick roadmap of the regulatory framework we're unpacking today. First, the power of the signature. Then, standard maintenance and repairs. After that, tracking airworthiness directives. Then, Form 337 for major alterations. And finally, we'll wrap up with the preventative maintenance exception.
Section 1. The power of the signature. Look, in aviation maintenance, especially under rules like PCR Part 5, putting your name on a document, that is not just some rubber stamp formality. It's a massive acceptance of legal and professional responsibility. There are 4 absolutely non-negotiable elements that have to be there when a mechanic signs off on maintenance documentation. First up, you need the exact completion date of the work. Second, a specific description of the work or a direct reference to acceptable data, meaning you can't just scribble "fixed it." You have to say exactly how you fixed it based on approved manuals. Third, you need the name, the physical signature, and the actual certificate number of the person approving the work. And fourth, it must clearly identify the specific aircraft, engine, or appliance being approved for return to service, or RTS. This rigid setup guarantees there is absolutely zero ambiguity about who is taking the ultimate responsibility for putting that plane back in the air.
Moving right along, Section 2, standard maintenance and repairs.
So, what does this actually look like out in the real world? Well, this brilliantly illustrates how those 4 mandatory elements come together in an actual aircraft repair entry. Look at the date right there, March 24th, 2020. Next to it, the total time in service and the tachometer time are meticulously logged at 1499.67 hours and 3.07 hours. Then, check out that description. It doesn't just casually say replaced alternator. It gets hyper-specific. Replace the alternator on the left engine as per Textron Lycoming Maintenance Manual Chapter 7270. It even lists the exact part and serial numbers they swapped out. And finally, right at the bottom, we have the name, signature, and the AMT certificate number of the person who actually did the work. That right there is the gold standard of an unquestionable paper trail.
Now, there is a slight distinction worth noting here, depending on who is doing the paperwork. Standard maintenance personnel, like an individual mechanic, they return work to service using the authorization of their own personal technician certificate, just like that entry we just looked at. But a certified repair station, or CRS, well, they operate on a much larger scale, so they use a slightly different entry procedure that's tailored to their organizational certification. But make no mistake, regardless of the route they take, the level of absolute accountability remains exactly the same.
Next up, Section 3, tracking airworthiness directives.
If a standard repair is like taking your daily vitamins, an airworthiness directive, or AD, is basically an emergency public health mandate. These are safety updates that are legally enforceable and absolutely mandatory, so tracking them is incredibly strict. Mechanics have to document these in a few specific ways depending on the directive itself. Sometimes, an AD requires a one-time compliance entry. You do the fix once, boom, it's permanently resolved. Other times, for more complex issues, you'll need a recurring AD compliance entry. That means the inspection or part swap has to happen at regular intervals, say every 100 flight hours. To keep all of this straight, mechanics use an AD compliance listing format. Think of it as a master ledger that clearly shows exactly when every single applicable AD was complied with and exactly what method they used to get it done. And what's really interesting here is how this real FAA compliance record translates all those abstract rules into a concrete, line-by-line reality. You can clearly see the AD numbers, the effective dates, and detailed descriptions of the safety issues. Things like preventing an in-flight fire from a loose antenna connector or advising a pilot on proper fuel transfer pump operation. Serious stuff. You'll also notice a column dedicated to whether the compliance is a once or recur situation. And crucially, there's the signature and certificate number of the authorized inspector who verified it. This single piece of paper is literally the physical trail of flight safety.
All right, Section 4, Form 337 and major alterations. So, what happens when an aircraft undergoes something way beyond a routine fix? Well, it requires specialized paperwork. Form 337 is this mandatory, highly specific document used exclusively for major alterations and major repairs. We're talking significant structural changes or complex, heavy-duty overhauls. What makes Form 337 so unique is how it's laid out. The front handles the overarching details and approvals, but the back of the form? That is absolutely crucial. That's where the mechanic has to comprehensively describe the repair and cite the exact approved data. We're talking engineering blueprints, structural manuals, authority-approved guidelines that they followed to get the job done.
Let's see how this builds into a really strict, separated workflow to guarantee safety. Completing a Form 337 is fundamentally a multi-person job. It's built entirely on checks and balances. In step 1, the person who actually performs the repair fills out the form, detailing their work and the data on the back. But, and this is a big but, they do not sign the approval for return to service. In step 2, a totally separate, specially authorized person steps in to independently inspect that major repair. Finally, in step 3, only after that independent inspection passes with flying colors does that authorized person fill out the block approving the aircraft for return to service. So, the person turning the wrench on a major structural change is never, ever the sole person authorizing its return to the sky.
Finally, Section 5, the preventive maintenance exception. Okay, we've spent this entire explainer talking about rigid rules, master ledgers, and dual signatures. But now, we're going to shift gears to a really surprising twist in the regulations. It's an exception built around a category called preventive maintenance. According to rules like FAR Part 43 or the PCAR Part 5 implementing standards, preventive maintenance covers specific tasks that are strictly minor in nature. The key here is that these tasks require no complex disassembly or reassembly of the aircraft. Think of things that are basically akin to changing your car's oil or swapping out a standard tire.
So here is the crucial, almost crazy point. How the regulations treat these minor tasks depends entirely on who is holding the tools. If the owner or operator of the aircraft decides to perform these authorized preventative tasks on their own plane, there is actually no regulatory requirement to enter those items into the maintenance records. I'll say that again. Zero paperwork is required from the owner. But if you hire a highly trained, certified technician to perform those exact same minor items on your aircraft, well, the rules snap right back into place. That technician absolutely must officially log the items as a minor repair, complete with their signature and certificate number. It's a fascinating regulatory double standard, and it's based entirely on ownership versus professional certification.
Which brings us to our final thought. We've navigated the meticulous requirements for signatures, the logging of standard repairs, tracking ADs, and the strict workflow of Form 337. Honestly, it can seem like an absolute mountain of dry paperwork. But I want to leave you with this question. Would you fly on an aircraft with an incomplete history? Ultimately, this entire regulatory framework isn't just a bunch of bureaucracy. It's the heroic and visible backbone of aviation safety. Every single logbook entry is a promise, a legal and moral guarantee that an aircraft is truly fit for the sky. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I hope you never look at a maintenance logbook the same way again.